The story of the British gold sovereign is a thread woven deep into the fabric of this nation's history. It's a story not just of money, but of power, ambition, and, well, the very idea of Britain itself. To find its beginning, we must travel back in time, back to the end of a long and bloody conflict. We land in the year 1489. The Wars of the Roses, that brutal family squabble between the houses of Lancaster and York, had finally come to an end. A new king sat on the throne, a Tudor king, Henry VII. He had won his crown on the battlefield, but holding on to it was another matter entirely. He needed to show his people and the world that a new age had begun. Henry VII was a clever man, a shrewd operator. He understood the power of symbols, the importance of projecting an image of stability and wealth after decades of chaos. The country needed healing. It needed unity. Henry needed to stamp his authority on the land, to make his mark in a way that was both grand and undeniable. So he looked to the very currency of the realm. He decided to create a new coin, a magnificent gold coin, the likes of which England had never seen before. This wasn't just about making money, it was a statement. It was a declaration that the Tudor dynasty was here to stay, as solid and as valuable as pure gold. This new coin was to be called the Sovereign. The name itself was a stroke of genius. It spoke of absolute power, of the monarch as the ultimate authority in the land. It was to be the largest and most valuable English coin ever minted. Struck from 23-carat gold, almost pure, it was a tangible piece of the King's Majesty that people could hold in their hands. The order was given to the Royal Mint, a command to forge a coin that would reflect the glory of the new king and his united kingdom. This was more than currency. It was royal propaganda, a golden messenger sent out to every corner of the realm to announce the arrival of a new and powerful era. The creation of the first sovereign in 1489 was a pivotal moment. It marked the end of the medieval period and the dawn of the Renaissance in England. It was a physical embodiment of Henry's vision for his kingdom, prosperous, strong, and unified under a single undisputed ruler. This coin wasn't just for buying goods in the marketplace. Its sheer value meant it was for the wealthiest merchants and nobles. It was a tool for international trade and a way of displaying immense wealth. From this single act of a new king, a numismatic legend was born, a journey of gold that would span more than 500 years and echo through the ages. The first sovereign was a masterpiece of political art, every detail carefully chosen to send a powerful message. When you look at one of these original coins, you're looking at Henry VII's ambition cast in gold. On the front, the obverse, the king is not just shown as a simple portrait. He is enthroned in full coronation regalia, seated on his throne, holding the orb and scepter. This was a deliberate and powerful image. It didn't just show the king's face, it showed him as God's anointed ruler, the source of all justice and power in the kingdom. It was an image designed to inspire awe and command respect, a far cry from the simpler portraits of earlier monarchs. Then there is the other side, the reverse. Here we see the magnificent Tudor rose, a brand new symbol for a brand new dynasty. This wasn't just any flower. It was a clever fusion of the red rose of Lancaster and the white rose of York. By placing this combined rose at the heart of his new coin, Henry was broadcasting a message of peace and unity. He was declaring that the bitter rivalry that had torn the country apart was over. The two houses were now one, united under the Tudor crown. In the centre of the rose was a shield bearing the royal arms of England, reinforcing the idea of a strong, protected realm. The coin continued to be minted by Henry's successors, each monarch adapting it to reflect their own reign. His son, the infamous Henry VIII, issued his own magnificent sovereigns, often showing him as a powerful, imposing figure, reflecting his larger-than-life personality. Under his young son, Edward VI, the designs changed again, and later his daughter Mary I even featured her husband, Philip of Spain, on some of the coinage. Each coin is a small snapshot of the time, a reflection of the politics and personalities that shaped the Tudor court. The sovereign was a constant presence, a golden thread running through the family's dramatic story. However, it was under Elizabeth I that the sovereign reached a new height of artistry and refinement. The coins from her long reign are some of the most beautiful ever produced. They show a queen at the height of her power, the ruler of a confident and increasingly influential nation. Yet, as the Tudor dynasty came to an end with Elizabeth's death in 1603, the story of the original sovereign also drew to a close. A new family, the Stuarts, would come to the throne, and with them new ideas and new coins. The first chapter of the sovereign's life was over, but its legacy was firmly set. When James VI of Scotland became James I of England in 1603, he brought the Stuart dynasty to the English throne. Like Henry VII before him, he wanted to use coinage to signal a new beginning. He continued to mint a large gold coin, but he renamed it the Unite, symbolising the joining of the crowns of England and Scotland. A few years later, the name sovereign was briefly revived, but the coin was soon replaced by another, the laurel. The original grand Tudor sovereign, with its iconic image of the enthroned monarch, had faded from use. The name and the tradition seemed to have been lost to the mints. The 17th century was a time of immense upheaval for Britain, a turbulent period of civil war, revolution, and the execution of a king. During the reign of Charles I, the country was plunged into conflict. The coinage of the time tells this story vividly, with rough, ready siege pieces being struck in towns under attack to pay soldiers. After the restoration of the monarchy with Charles II, a new, modern era of coin-making began. New machine presses were introduced, creating coins that were more uniform and harder to counterfeit. This was the age of the magnificent guinea, a new gold coin that would become the mainstay of British currency for the next 150 years. The guinea took its name from the Guinea coast of West Africa, where much of the gold used to mint the first coins came from. It was a hugely successful coin, trusted and respected across the growing British Empire and beyond. For a century and a half, it was the guinea, not the sovereign, that was the gold coin of the realm. The memory of the old Tudor sovereign, that great coin of Henry VII, had all but vanished from public life. It was now a historical curiosity, a relic from a distant past, slumbering in the cabinets of a few discerning collectors. The name lay dormant, waiting for its moment to be reborn. It seemed as if the sovereign's story was over, a short but glorious chapter in the history of the nation's money. Nobody in the 18th century, the age of enlightenment and reason, would have guessed that this medieval coin would ever return. The world had moved on. The British economy was powered by the guinea, and the nation was on the cusp of an industrial revolution that would change the world forever. But history has a funny way of repeating itself. A great crisis was looming, a conflict that would shake Europe to its core and create the perfect conditions for the sovereign's spectacular return. The end of the 18th and the beginning of the 19th century were defined by one major event: the long and costly wars against Napoleonic France. This was total war, on a scale never seen before. Britain poured its wealth into fighting Napoleon, on land and at sea. The economic strain was immense. Gold became scarce as it was used to fund armies and pay subsidies to Britain's allies. People began to hoard gold coins, and soon they disappeared from circulation altogether. The government was forced to issue the first paper banknotes as a substitute, but people were suspicious of this newfangled paper money. The nation's finances were in a mess. After Napoleon's final defeat at the Battle of Waterloo in 1815, Britain was victorious, but its economy was on its knees. The currency was in chaos. The old silver coins were worn smooth, and counterfeit copper coins were everywhere. The government knew that something drastic had to be done to restore confidence and stability. They needed a plan, a grand gesture that would put the nation's finances back on solid ground. This led to the Great Recoinage of 1816, a monumental undertaking to completely reform Britain's money. A key part of this reform was the official adoption of the gold standard. The gold standard was a simple but powerful idea. It meant that the value of Britain's currency, the pound sterling, was fixed to a specific amount of gold. This guaranteed its value and made it trustworthy across the world. But to make this system work, Britain needed a new, reliable gold coin. The guinea, with its slightly awkward value of 21 shillings, was retired. A new coin, with a value of exactly £1 or 20 shillings, was needed. And so the government looked back into the history books. They decided to resurrect a name that spoke of power, tradition and authority: the sovereign. The new sovereign was born. It was to be the cornerstone of this new financial system, the anchor of the pound sterling. The Royal Mint, now equipped with the latest steam-powered presses from the brilliant engineer Matthew Boulton, was tasked with producing millions of these new gold coins. It was a hugely ambitious project, but it was essential for the future of the British economy. The return of a gold coin that people could trust marked a turning point. It signalled that Britain was back in business, its wealth and power restored after years of war. The sovereign was reborn, not just as a coin, but as the symbol of a new era of British economic dominance. With the decision made to bring back the sovereign, the Royal Mint needed a design for the new coin, one that was, truly worthy of its name and its crucial role. So they turned to a brilliant but fiery Italian gem engraver who had recently arrived in London, a man named Benedetto Pistrucci. He was a master of his craft, and he was given the task of creating a design for the reverse of the new coin. What he produced was not just a design, it was honestly a work of art, an image so powerful and dynamic that it has become famous the world over. It is a design that has defined the sovereign for over 200 years. Pistrucci chose a theme that was, deeply rooted in English folklore and chivalry, the legend of St. George and the Dragon. But he depicted it in a way no one had before. He rejected the traditional, static medieval style. Instead, inspired by the classical art of ancient Greece, he created a scene of pure action and energy. His St. George is a heroic, naked Greek warrior, wearing only a helmet and cloak. He is mounted on a powerful horse that rears up as St. George thrusts his sword down to slay the monstrous dragon writhing beneath the horse's hooves. It is, quite simply, a breathtaking image of the triumph of good over evil. The design was an immediate sensation. It was a masterpiece of neoclassical art, perfectly in tune with the tastes of the age. It was dynamic, powerful, and heroic. Everything that Britain felt itself to be after its victory over Napoleon. St. George was Britain, and the dragon was the defeated French emperor. The design was so admired that it has been used on the sovereign almost continuously ever since. When you think of a sovereign, it is Pistrucci's St. George and the Dragon that immediately springs to mind. It is one of the most enduring and iconic coin designs in history. On the obverse of the coin was a portrait of the reigning monarch, King George III. The combination of the monarch's head on one side and Pistrucci's dramatic scene on the other created a coin that was both a symbol of royal authority and a miniature work of art. The quality of the minting, using the new steam presses, meant that the fine details of Pistrucci's engraving could be reproduced perfectly on every single coin. The new sovereign of 1817 wasn't just a piece of gold. It was a statement of artistic and technical excellence, a fitting symbol for a nation at the dawn of its industrial and imperial power. The 19th century was, without doubt, Britain's century. The Industrial Revolution had, transformed the nation into the workshop of the world, and the British Empire had expanded to cover a quarter of the globe. At the very heart of this vast network of trade and power was a single, small gold coin, the sovereign. During the long reign of Queen Victoria from 1837 to 1901, the sovereign became more than just British money. It became, the world's money. It was trusted everywhere, from the ports of Hong Kong to the banks of New York, from the bustling markets of India to the sheep farms of Australia. Its gold content and weight were guaranteed, making it the ultimate international currency. The demand for sovereigns was honestly enormous. The Royal Mint in London simply couldn't keep up. So, to solve this problem, branch mints were opened across the empire in places where new gold was being discovered. The first was in Sydney, Australia in 1855, followed by Melbourne and Perth. Later, mints were opened in Canada, South Africa and India. You can actually tell where a sovereign was made by a tiny letter, a mint mark, on the coin. An S for Sydney, an M for Melbourne, a P for Perth. These little letters tell a story of a truly global currency, minted across the world to fuel the trade of a worldwide empire. Imagine, if you will, a wool merchant in Australia selling his goods to a clothmaker in Yorkshire. He would be paid in sovereigns. A tea trader in India buying tea to ship back to London would use sovereigns. British engineers building railways in Africa or South America would have their wages paid in sovereigns. The coin was, quite literally, the lifeblood of global commerce. It was so respected that many other countries used it as the basis for their own currencies. The sovereign was the gold standard, the benchmark against which all other money was measured. It was a small circular piece of British power that could be slipped into a pocket. Throughout Victoria's long reign, her portrait on the sovereign actually aged with her. We see the young head from the beginning of her reign, then the Jubilee head from 1887, and finally the old or veiled head from her later years. These portraits trace the life of a monarch who came to define an era. Seeing these different portraits on the coins is, in a way, like turning the pages of a history book. Each sovereign minted during her reign is a tiny piece of the Victorian age, a testament to a time when British influence and its gold coin held sway over the entire planet. The dawn of the 20th century saw the sovereign at the absolute peak of its power and influence. It was really the undisputed king of coins, the foundation of the global financial system. But this golden age, well, it was not to last. In 1914, the world was plunged into the First World War. This was a war on an industrial scale, a conflict that consumed men and materials at a terrifying rate. The economic cost was, frankly, astronomical. Just as in the Napoleonic Wars a century earlier, the government needed gold, and it needed it desperately. A campaign was launched, famously featuring Lord Kitchener, urging the public to exchange their gold sovereigns for paper money to help fund the war effort. Patriotism ran high, and people handed in their gold in their millions. The sovereign, the everyday coin of the realm, disappeared from circulation in Britain almost overnight. Production of the sovereign for use as currency in Britain stopped in 1917. The coin that had been a familiar sight in people's pockets for a century was gone, melted down to pay for shells and ships. The war marked the end of an era. The gold standard, which had been the basis of the world economy, collapsed. The age of gold currency was over, replaced by the age of paper money managed by governments. After the war, there were attempts to bring back the gold standard and the sovereign. For a brief period in the late 1920s, the coin was minted again. But the Great Depression of the 1930s put a final end to those hopes. The world had changed. Another world war followed, further cementing the role of government-controlled currencies. The sovereign, it seemed, was now truly a thing of the past. It was no longer minted for circulation, and its role as the world's leading trade coin had been taken over by the US dollar. The once mighty sovereign was now just a memory, a relic of a lost imperial age. But the story doesn't end there. Even though it was no longer used as money in Britain, the sovereign's reputation for trust and value endured, especially in other parts of the world like the Middle East and Asia. The demand for gold coins remained high. This led to a problem with counterfeiting. To combat this, and to meet the continuing international demand, the British government made a surprising decision. In 1957, the Royal Mint began striking sovereigns once more. They were not for use in Britain, but for sale overseas. The sovereign had found a new role, not as currency, but as a trusted store of value, a bullion coin for investors around the globe. The decision to restart production in 1957 marked the beginning of a new chapter for the sovereign. It began its transformation from a tool of commerce into a treasured object for collectors and investors. The new sovereigns, bearing the portrait of the young Queen Elizabeth II, were struck to the exact same high standards as their Victorian predecessors. They contained the same amount of 22-carat gold and featured the classic St. George and the dragon design. For gold investors, they were a reliable and easily tradable way to own gold. For collectors, it was the continuation of a great numismatic tradition. As the years went by, the Royal Mint began to realise the huge appeal that the sovereign held for collectors. People were fascinated by its long and dramatic history, its connection to kings and queens, and its role in the story of the British Empire. The Mint began to produce special proof versions of the sovereign each year. These are very high-quality coins, struck multiple times with specially polished dies to create a flawless mirror-like finish. They are not intended for spending or investing, but are pure collector's items, works of miniature art produced in limited numbers. The sovereign also became a way to mark great national events and royal milestones. Special one-off designs were created for the reverse, replacing St. George and the Dragon for a single year to commemorate an important occasion. For Queen Elizabeth II's Golden Jubilee in 2002, a special design featuring the Royal Coat of Arms was used. For her Diamond Jubilee in 2012, a new, more modern interpretation of St. George and the Dragon was created. These commemorative editions are highly sought after by collectors, each one telling a small part of our modern history. Today, the sovereign is more popular than ever. Each year, the Royal Mint releases a new sovereign bearing the date of that year, continuing an unbroken tradition that stretches back to 1957. It is a coin that connects the present day directly with the past. Holding a new sovereign in your hand, you are holding an object with a history that goes back to Henry VII. It is a symbol of continuity, of tradition, and of the enduring appeal of gold. From a king's propaganda tool to an empire's currency, the sovereign has completed its journey to become one of the most beloved and collected coins in the world. The journey of the British gold sovereign is honestly a remarkable one, mirroring the rise, fall and reinvention of Britain itself. It began as a bold statement of power by a new king, a piece of golden propaganda designed to unite a fractured kingdom. It was a coin born of conflict and ambition, its very name a declaration of royal authority. Through the turbulent reigns of the Tudors and Stuarts, it appeared and disappeared, a reflection of the changing fortunes of the monarchy. Its early life was glorious but fleeting, a prelude to the main act that was yet to come. Its rebirth in 1817 marked a new beginning, not just for the coin, but for the nation. It became the anchor of the economy, the symbol of Britain's recovery and its growing industrial might. Paired with Pistrucci's immortal design of St. George and the Dragon, the modern sovereign became an icon. During the long peace of the Victorian era, it conquered the world not by force, but by trust. It was the universal language of trade, the small gold disc that powered a global empire, minted on 3 continents and accepted on all of them. It was, in every sense, the coin of the realm, and the realm was the world. The great wars of the 20th century seemed to spell its doom. The age of gold currency passed, and the sovereign was retired from service, a victim of total war and a changing economic order. It became a memory, a keepsake of a bygone era, stored in the velvet-lined trays of collectors. But legends are, you know, hard to kill. The sovereign's reputation for purity and value lived on, creating a new demand that brought it back from the brink. It found a new purpose, not as money to be spent, but as gold to be saved, a trusted store of wealth for a new generation. And so today, the sovereign endures. It is a direct link to over 500 years of British history, a story told in 22-carat gold. It connects the age of steam with the digital age, the reign of Henry VII, with that of our modern monarchs. It represents artistry in the genius of Pistrucci's design. It represents history in the portraits of the kings and queens it has borne. And it represents value in the timeless universal appeal of pure gold. The sovereign is more than just a coin. It is a national treasure, a golden thread running through our island's story, as enduring and as precious as the metal from which it is struck.